Great. So if you have any questions, feel free, as mentioned, to run them over the conference app or click on the QR code and you can access it there. Otherwise, we might be able to, if you stand up, we might be able to hear from you there as well, but the preference is the app. Yes, so much star power in this room. Thank you for sharing. We're so privileged to hear from all of you, and as mentioned, there's so many great people in the audience too, and all the work that you've done. To start off with, we have a question asking about how do we create sexual positive social media guidelines that also create safe spaces for those that are apprehensive from being in strong sexually themed contexts without suppressing those further along on their expressive journey. Maybe that's good for you, Zahra.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. What a great question. And as always, these things are such a balance. And when we were putting forward the manifesto, we really wanted to put forward, I guess, a set of principles, but really need to be operationalized in different local contexts. And there's a lot of work to be done in thinking, like, what does this mean at a technical level in how platforms negotiate this on a day-to-day basis among users, and what kind of affordances are put in place. There's some interesting things happening on social media platforms now that are emerging, like Lip Social, for example, who are attempting to be a kind of sex-positive, queer-friendly social media space. And part of that is creating more options for users to opt in and opt out of content. In particular, being able to select when you sign up, but this is the kinds of content that I would like to see, this is the kind of content that I would not like to see, and ensuring that they can kind of navigate those spaces in a kind of agentic way. But the other part of that is then ensuring that the content itself is tagged appropriately and tagged accurately. And many users, like some platforms, will only have certain tags on drop-down menus that people will have to abide by. And so there's a big push for users to be able to contest the tags that the automated systems are coming up with, as well as the ones that the platforms are designating, and to be able to create their own tags and their own meanings. So I guess there's this kind of a dual approach there with the tagging systems and also the user options to ensure that people can navigate spaces in a kind of a trauma-informed way. But that's something that I think really needs to be developed, and we really need more work on that space to think about what that means in operation, and then how algorithms are trained appropriately to do that effectively. And then when inevitably that goes wrong, what are the accountability measures that happen that can have perhaps a more transformative justice approach to it, rather than kind of isolating people from spaces, or an educative approach where we can kind of help users understand in the platform space, like, why this is important.
Great, yeah. And did anyone else want to add to that, or I'll leave it to Zahra? Thank you. Maybe this is one for you, Sam, but where did all that glitter go?
Yes, it's it's all eco-friendly, biodegradable glitter, and yeah, I mean, it's still on me a little bit, but yeah.
It never comes out.
Yeah, it never does.
Continuing on the theme of the sexual media guidelines, we have a question asking around, have the digital sexual platform guidelines been added to gaming and VR?
Yeah, look, I think they are can be used across a range of different spaces. I mean, this is happening not just on social media, but, well, if you think about social media more broadly as including gaming and VR, for example, there's so much happening in that space, and particularly like Twitch is a great example where there was advocacy for so long for trans users to have a trans tag. If you look at other sites like Pornhub, for example, there's a lot of contestation around what kind of tags there are for content, and users being able to create their own tags and to self-identify. I think I'm not really in the gaming space, but I know there's a lot of kind of queer social media scholars who do look at gaming, who are doing really interesting work around that, because there's so many big issues around content deletion, and also people who are out in gaming spaces, who are out as sex workers on other platforms, or who are visibly queer, or who are out as trans, being maliciously flagged or harassed and abused in those online spaces is a big issue too.
Well, feel free to keep asking questions through the app. We don't have any more for now, but I was wondering. Oh, sorry, I can't.
I think someone needs to scroll it up.
Yeah.
Use those glitters to slide it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, there.
There we go. Okay, great. I'll save my question for later. Can we scroll up a little bit more, please?
Just trying to fix the tech.
Okay, great, no worries.
You want us to ask our questions out loud? Yeah.
We have them up now, but thank you. Yeah, I'll get to you if your question doesn't come up. So we have a question on some donors say that art activism doesn't have impact. But how would you argue against this?
I think those donors need to wake up firstly and understand the impacts that art activism has. I mean, if we think about COVID and how everything got shut down, the arts activism that happened across social media platforms was huge. It was affirming, it was life-saving, it connected so many people who were in positions of feeling isolated and lonely, where mental health was, a serious thing that impact on people's livelihoods. And I think donors should recognise that as one aspect, but it's also to, not take away the fact that art activism has existed forever, and it has catapulted so many things into the attention of people in society about a number of issues. So I think ignoring it or stating that it doesn't have an impact is a real slap in the face to all activists, whether they are art activists, whether they're activists in general.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that, and I think it's really important to reflect on what we mean by art and what we mean by activism, actually, in that sentiment, because art takes so many different forms. What do these donors imagine when they talk about art? Are they imagining some painting in a gallery, for example, which is great, and that is definitely a form of art, but art takes all kinds of forms. Think about graffiti and street art, for example, the art of communities, in places that might not be formal gallery spaces or spaces that require entry, but they have hugely political impacts, in terms of branding around messages, around ideas, around concepts. But also, it's important to remind people that activism is also not just rallies or protests. It takes forms, as we've seen, in pageants, in home spaces. It takes form in lobbying, in writing letters, in engaging with your own community about particular issues that matter to you. So I would sort of push back on that question if someone, a donor had ever said that, to say, well, what do you mean by art and what do you mean by activism? And in fact, what do you even mean by impact here? Because the other thing is just because there's no financial or even necessarily like a legislative outcome, that doesn't mean there isn't a social, cultural, community impact that is good. And also the other thing for me is that the great thing about art's impact is it's unexpected. You're not always going to forewarn or predetermine what impact art can have, and I think that's a great thing.
Can I add something to that, just in terms of the social media space and the regulation of pornography and the ways in which pornography is not seen as art, but there's the ways in which the term pornography kind of emerged. It very much emerged as something that was seen as for the masses, entertainment that was different to preserve the status of art, and so art then became something that was in museums, and you taught art history, and it became a discipline, whereas pornography became the pejorative term, and this distinction between porn and art as if they are totally separate things was actually a very intentional political decision during the 19th century, and then it has kind of transpired into the discourses we see today. And there's some really fascinating ways in which that manifests. I don't know if anyone saw the Paul Ure exhibition at Carriage Works over the weekend for World Pride, but I first came across his art because his work was he was prosecuted for child pornography because there was a picture in one of his collages made about 10 years ago that involved Justin Bieber's face and a penis. It looked like he was sucking cock, and it was there was a collage, and Justin Bieber was 16. And our legislation means that anyone who appears under 18, regardless of whether they are under 18, or whether it is slash fiction, or whether it is hentai, or whether it is, you know, a verbal communication, these all things all fall under child pornography. So there's really political what we think of as what is art, what is pornography, you know, and there's some really interesting things happening now in the AI space where some artists have reverse engineered some of the nudity and porn classifiers to create artworks that are that AI will detect as pornographic, but they are not really body parts. Like, they look kind of like body parts, but it's like AI spitting out bizarre abstract images that will be read as pornography. And it's really interesting the way that art is then being used to kind of challenge the regulatory space.
Fascinating. We have a question about beauty pageants and asking what are the beauty standards for the Miss Galaxy pageants. The question's disappeared, but it was also asking...
I looked at it. Cool.
Okay.
I think in response, I think I will correct you in the sense that you might be looking at or framing the Miss Galaxy beauty pageant aligned to Western beauty pageants like Miss Universe or Miss World. As we stated in our presentation, the Miss Galaxy beauty pageant is not about beauty standards. It uses the beauty in many things. It is led by it has no connection to anything to do with patriarchy. It is on their terms. It is by them, for them. It uses that model to change this whole concept of beauty pageants and how they work and how they align for the communities. Joeleen can speak to why they use that as a platform, but I think it had a deep-centered connection around many things: entertainment value, putting everybody on a platform, addressing issues and raising awareness. So I think when we think about beauty pageants for trans women in particular, or LGBTQI individuals within Pacific countries, we should never by default compare them to Western type beauty pageants where it is emphasized or controlled by patriarchal narratives or models. So I just wanted to reinforce that, but maybe Joeleen, if you wanted to add to that.
I just want to bring you back, you know, the traditional beauty pageant in Tonga is called Fahaiula. And Fahaiula is when our kings and nobles used to, they bring in all the eldest daughter of high chiefs of the village, and then they come and do this form of dance. That's when our kings used to choose their wives. But that was our traditional pageant. But we cannot do that because Fahaiula nowadays is only performed for royal occasions, for royal coronation and all that. They don't dance it in any other time. So we had to use the Western kind of pageant to be able to bring people in, because we seem to be, when we couldn't write the proposals that the donors actually asked, you know, us to do, they didn't even accept any of our proposal until they didn't even like the word retreat because they thought that we're going to the beach to enjoy. But we left school because of the classroom setting. We do not want to go back there. And the reason why we started this is because the donors didn't understand what we're talking about. They didn't understand what beauty pageant means. And then, after we started doing this, then everybody was starting to say, oh, so it works. When they walked in, and one of the things that I always ask donors is, I'm not going to take your money until you come yourself, sit in the pageant, and that whole week of the advocacy work that we do, see the results that you wanted. And this is how we do it. We're not going to bring your Western ideas for us to run it, and so you think that you can get what you...
Great. Well, okay, please. We're running to time now, but if you can quickly ask a question. Yeah.
Based on what you've just said, Joeleen, and amazing panel, and the whole conceptualisation of art as politics, but actually art as a medium to transform the environments that we live in, right, which is what it's all about. But I beg of you, Phylesha and Joey, to please write up the methodology after 30 years of the Leitis, because I think about the platforms, which is the context to develop our leadership, and to highlight also our value and our utility to the community. What really struck me was some of the other dimensions of the pageant about the community service, the community work. And if you could write that up, then I think it would be a lot easier for us to use that methodology in other areas, such as sport, for example, and how can we platform the contribution of our Fakafifine, Leitis across the Pacific. And I'm particularly thinking about netball. I'll just put it in.
And we're very fortunate enough, during the Miss Galaxy, we run the NCD campaign, and that is always funded by MVPFAFF. So we're very fortunate that that's part of our program every year, and that's netball, through netball.
And so MVPFAFF can include some money to help us write the methodology.
Exactly. And by the way, if any of you want to join us in Tonga, the Miss Galaxy runs from the 8th of July to the 15th. It's a whole week of celebration. So.
Great. Well, we have plenty more questions, but I encourage you to continue this conversation outside over lunch, which will be in the gallery on level 2. And please join me in thanking our fantastic panelists.
We are